Welcome to the Integrated YouTube channel and podcast for people in grief and the professionals who serve them. We are here to provide education, inspiration, and practical tools for our audience by interviewing those bereaved by loss, mental health professionals, and grief specialists. Our mission here at the Integrated Wellbeing Institute is to awaken the griever to their inner peace through the guidance of their body. So today I am absolutely delighted to welcome our guest, Coach Bobbi Kahler. So Bobbi, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Georgena.
You're so welcome. The reason I invited Bobbi is that she has been a coach now for 20 years. She's been an esteemed coach, and she's going to share that part of her business with you today. And this business has also shifted and changed as Bobbi's has shifted and changed over time. And Bobbi, like each of us, is a human being who's encountered loss. And she's going to share that and what supported her in this very personal, large loss, most recently in her life. So, Bobbi, I'm curious, what prompted you to become a coach?
Well, two early childhood experiences, actually, Georgena.
Really? Okay, yeah. I've not heard these.
Okay, so the first, you probably don't know this about me. When I was 5 years old, the school that I attended brought in a speech pathologist because I had really bad speech problems.
You know, I was a speech pathologist?
No, I did not know that.
Yeah, I was one of those. Okay, so another connection.
Another connection.
Right. So let's go back to this little 5-year-old.
Yeah, so oh my God, nobody could understand me. My mom could understand me and my older sister, Kathy. That was it. That was it. At 5. It was bad.
Wow.
It was bad. It was so bad that the speech pathologist, he told my mom, he's like, she'll never speak correctly. Like he said, I'd have a lifelong disability. And now my mom was her own person, let's say.
Yay, mom.
Yay, mom. And she's like, that's stupid. We're not going to listen to him. But it was one of those great life lessons because she's like, you never let someone else tell you what you can or cannot do. And so she worked so hard alongside of me. I was actually in my 20s before I stopped thinking of myself as someone with speech problems. So as you can imagine, I did not like speaking in public. Those days, oh God, remember those days in school where, you'd have to read a paragraph, everyone, and oh man, I'd be the one, like, it'd be on the other side of the room. I'm like, oh, what paragraph am I going to be? So I could be running it through my head. And then someone would be an overachiever and read 2 paragraphs and throw off the whole thing. Like, don't do that. So when I was in the 8th grade, I thought I still had bad speech problems. And I thought, I need to do something to get over this fear because you have to be able to talk in front of at least a small group. Yes. And that just struck terror in my heart. So I decided I was going to take a speech class in high school. And I signed up, and my teacher was Mr. Jordan. And this was the real experience that really brought me to coaching. And so he said, pick something you're excited about for your speech. And I did. It was muscular dystrophy. And that was great because I was passionate about it. But there's a lot of science terms that are hard to pronounce for anybody, let alone someone with speech problems. So I gave my presentation and it was horrible. Like it was an absolute train wreck. And I'm not being hard on myself. It was bad. And so the bell rang to dismiss the class. And Mr. Jordan said, Bobbi, can you stick around for a minute? And I thought, oh my goodness, he's going to tell me not to come back. And so I stayed, and he's like, hey. Now, as luck would have it, he was also the debate coach for our high school. And our debate team was very competitive and they were very, very good. And he said, have you ever considered taking debate? And I just looked at him and I'm like, did you not hear that? Like, that was so bad. And he just kind of smiled a little bit and he said, it wasn't good, but he said, you have potential. And he said, with your potential and your work ethic and me as your coach, you could really excel at this. And so that's how I ended up taking speech and debate when I was in high school. And I did win tournaments. And it really showed that my mom and Mr. Jordan really showed to me the power of coaching. When someone believes in you and they're willing to work alongside of you to draw out your natural potential. And every job I ever had before I even became a coach, like right after high school, I didn't go to college right after high school. My parents didn't believe in it. So I had to work a bunch of jobs to pay my way through college. But I was a store manager at McDonald's. I was one of the youngest ever and one of the first female ones.
Wow.
And that's training and development,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have to take people who have never had a job in many cases, you
Yes.
train them and you draw out their potential. And so
Yes.
that's where I think that's why I just fell in love with developing others, helping people on that path.
That's amazing. That sounds like your superpower.
I just loved it. I've always loved it.
Mm-hmm. That's so neat. Well, tell me how your coaching business now evolved over time, because you've had some really high-powered clients.
I've had some like Fortune 50 clients and not just a few, but a lot. And so it started, it started back in the early 2000s. And at first it was like, coaching clients here or there, whatever. And then I started coaching in the sales and leadership space. So specifically, I'd coach salespeople on how to increase their sales. And I would also coach sales managers on how to become better leaders for their team.
Neat.
And I loved that. I loved it. In that capacity, I mean, I've worked with companies like American Airlines, US Bank, MetLife, big companies. And at this point, I've coached well over 3,000 people in my career.
Oh, that's marvelous.
Yeah.
Wow.
So like at American Airlines or US Bank, it wasn't like one or two, it was like dozens, if not hundreds of managers at these things. So, and I think that early on, there was more of a focus on the outer game. You know what I mean? Like, how do you get better at sales? How do you become a better manager? And what I started to notice very quickly is our outer game success is very much tied to what we do in the inside, our inner game. How much because here's the thing, like in sales, people say, because we know, like if you're going to do consultative sales, you have to ask questions of the person that, potentially is buying from you. Everybody knows that. And I always thought, what I could give, if there's such a thing as a perfect list of questions, which I don't believe there are, but if there were, I could give that list to every person I meet, right? Not everyone can execute those questions.
That's right.
If you lack the self-confidence, the belief, if you don't know how to really be comfortable in that conversation, if you lack self-efficacy, if your mindset's off, if you've got that mind chatter,
yes,
that's such a big thing, right? Oh, this person doesn't want me to ask them this question.
right.
All that stuff plays such a role in our success. So over time, I really started to focus way more on the inner game stuff.
Good.
And even like the podcast now, the podcast is, I believe in the out, I believe we have to work on both inner and outer game.
Yes.
But we can't work on just the outer game.
Mm-hmm.
We'll never have the success and happiness and well-being if that's all we do.
That's really neat. And what I'm imagining from hearing this is that you also worked with groups of people. You worked with managers, maybe a room of 50 or 100 people, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So there you were speaking. You were going back to that first coaching with Mr. Jordan.
Yeah.
Which is really, really cool.
Yeah. Because I've done a lot of speaking, actually. I've done keynote speaking. I've done tons of facilitation. So it's always been. And one of the cool things too. This was years ago. I was in New York, and it was I was there for MetLife, as a matter of fact. And it was early in the morning. I was getting ready to get up and start getting ready for my day of work with them. And I got a Facebook request from Mr. Jordan.
Oh, how neat.
I know. And I got to tell him like how what he had done had helped me. And like that made my day. Like I was so excited for that day, that week. It was amazing. Just getting to
Yes.
tell someone, thank you for the difference that you've made. I
Mhm.
still get excited when I think about it.
And I can hear that. And how wonderful it is that he saw your potential. And as you
Yeah,
talk about the inner game and the outer game, that's what grief is. Grief
that's
is
right.
an inside job. And how are we going to show up in the world as a person in grief? How are we as a coach going to meet that person? As a therapist, how are we going to meet them as a
That's right.
Yeah. So this brings me then to the next question, Bobbi. Did you ever encounter a coaching client in grief? And was that grief holding them back from moving forward? Because that's my imagining.
Yeah. And here's the thing. So I don't specialize in grief coaching, right?
No, absolutely not. We know
Absolutely
that.
not. Yeah, that's not my, but here's what comes to mind there is I have coached people who I don't think they showed up as I'm grieving.
Mhm.
It was more they were trying to bury, or they had buried it in the past, recent past or distant past, but it was still keeping them from maybe truly showing up in their most powerful way. You know,
Wow.
I had, this was a therapist that I worked with. She was a therapist / coach years and years ago. Because a little bit about my background is my parents were wonderful, right? Love them dearly. And my mom was one of the most amazing people ever. And she also had deep psychological issues.
Oh.
So there was some abuse. Well, there was a lot of
Oh.
abuse, right?
Mhm.
And so I sought out a therapist who would help me through that because I needed someone who really understood family trauma. And one
Yes.
of the things that she told me was, you can either deal with it now or
Mhm.
you will deal with it later because it will come back at some point. And at
There-
that time, when I was talking with her, I was in my early mid 20s. So it was quite a while ago. So I've seen people in coaching where, there's something underlying where you can just like the way they talk about it. The other thing that happens too, like, you know what I mean? You can tell. And then I think though, there's also this message that we get, and I'd love your take on it. I think that there's a message that we get in companies and also in social media that tell us, even when you experience a loss, you can still feel gratitude. And I agree with that. But what I don't like is when it's like, what they're really saying is slap a Band-Aid on it and move on.
Exactly. And my take on that is the same.
Yeah.
So it's very, very important. I tell people it's essential for you to recognize your grief,
Mm-hmm.
where it lives in your body, to relate to your grief so that it can be reduced or it can be released in that moment.
That's
Because
right.
awareness is the first key to change. Change happens only in the present moment, but we need to give ourselves permission to fully feel. So if we just put, notice this feeling that's coming up and then move immediately to gratitude,
Yeah.
Bobbi, that's like putting whipped cream on poop.
That's exactly what it's like. Oh, I think we talked about this when you were on my podcast, right? Because when you were on my podcast, I don't think it was too long after the East Troublesome fire that
Yes.
went through my neighborhood, right? So 198,000 acres gone.
Yes.
We moved to that place specifically because there was a Nordic center, because I love cross-country skiing,
Yes.
2 minutes from the house.
Mhm.
And the fire came right through it. So the first time that we went out to ski after the fire, it was like skiing through an Ansel Adams picture.
Oh,
White snow, black tree stumps,
wow.
all the green. I mean, it was lush, 100-foot pines
Yes.
gone. Will never come back in my lifetime,
No,
right?
they won't.
I mean, it's gone.
Right.
And so we were out skiing and it was like this trauma of, oh my God. Plus we were there that night. So we saw the fire approaching, like we made it obvious, we made it out, but it was
Close.
it was close. We were only 10 minutes ahead of the fire.
Wow.
Yeah. Closer than what you want to be to a fire that's burning 100 miles an hour.
Yes.
And so we were out there skiing, and it was like I wanted to cry,
Yes.
because it's like, I know what this was like before and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, you got to find something, you got to find the silver lining. You got to find the silver lining. And I thought, wait a minute. Yes. And the question is when? To force the silver lining while I'm still hurting, that's not helpful. That is not helpful, So that's, yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, I think we've just got a subtitle to our conversation is, are you forcing the silver lining?
Yeah. Because I think, and this is something I noticed too, like during COVID, you'd see people post on LinkedIn, like, hey, I know working from home is tough, but be grateful you have a job. Wait, and a home. Okay. Yes. But to minimize what people are feeling,
yes,
is not okay. Because that's a real trauma.
It really is. I can't thank you enough for this conversation, because every month the Institute publishes a newsletter on the first Sunday of the month. And I looked at the blog for July this morning, and it's about gratitude, and it's about research. And I'm going to go back and read it again and make sure that everyone who reads it has permission to pause.
Yeah.
Permission to truly feel before they look outside and see. What we're talking about, in my experience right now, is that inside job.
Yep. Yeah.
And we can then, when we know life is, you and I are in a horizontal figure eight right now. You're in one loop out there, and I'm in the other loop. And so here we are, the infinity sign, linking the two of us together. I can't meet you in a genuine place unless I first have checked in with myself.
That's right.
In the workplace, you got to put on a happy face and just do your job. And yet you've got to recognize what's going on, make a note of it, bracket it, and deal with it that day.
Yep. Absolutely. Because otherwise, to your point, you can't show up authentically.
That's right.
And if we're not showing up authentically, we're cutting off our own power supply.
That's right. So your therapist said to you, you can deal with your grief now, or you will deal with it later. So how did you coach these people that were either unaware that they were grieving, or had stuffed it because they were afraid of it, or a million other reasons?
Yeah. So in that case, I would say I'm very careful about not stepping over a line when it comes to coaching.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
You're not a therapist.
I'm not a therapist,
Right.
So, but when I recognized it, would have a conversation, and it's basically like, to your point, raising awareness. And then sometimes the person's like, I don't know what to do with this. And at that point, it's like, you might consider finding a therapist or someone who specifically focuses on grief coaching or grief counseling.
Nice.
Yeah, because I think that's what's necessary. I don't want to coach in an area where I don't have the expertise that's going to help someone.
Yes.
So that's how I typically handled that.
That's great. And that's why the Institute has developed this 9-week program for coaches that want to add this to their aspect of coaching.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you know what's interesting there? The one thing I would say on that is, so many times as I'm thinking about it, the person would say to me, I know I shouldn't feel this way. I'm like, no, it's okay to feel this way,
Yes.
And it may be more than okay. You have to give yourself permission,
right,
to feel this
way.
Right. Because I think sometimes we're missing that, and I think that our friends and family and colleagues, whatever, I think it comes from a good space.
It does. Protective.
It's protective, and it's uncomfortable for people, and they just want you to make it through. Here's a great example. I was coaching. This was it was nurses. It was It's a health insurance company, big health insurance company. They have nurses on staff. They make calls to their members and they do health coaching over the phone.
Yes.
Great program. And most of
Yes.
the members have multiple chronic conditions.
Yes.
And I'll never forget this one. I was coaching a nurse. She was a sweetheart. And there was a recorded phone call where she reached out to the member and she did the HIPAA thing. And then she said, so are you sticking to your diet? And the member said, no, I haven't in the last week because my husband unexpectedly died.
Wow.
Exactly. And the nurse said, it's really important that you stick to your diet.
Oh, no.
Exactly. And this nurse and as soon as she heard it she's like, oh my God. And so we stopped the recording and I'm like, so tell me, because her reaction is exactly what yours is. And she's like, I just didn't know what to say.
That's right.
And I think, okay, so she's a nurse. I mean, you can't find more caring people, right? They're among the most caring, compassionate, wonderful people in the whole world.
Yes.
And I thought, if she didn't know what to say, what chance do the rest of us have?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
It's hard when you're with someone because you want to help. And she's like, I don't want to make it worse. I've heard that so many times from people. I don't want to make it worse. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that was that's what kind of came to mind there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And the awareness that when she could hear herself, she realized, oh, maybe I did make it worse.
Yeah, she did.
So I always say to people, oh, how tragic. There are no words.
That's perfect.
What happens is that allows the space, the quiet for that person to take it in and respond or not. You don't know what's going to happen next.
You don't. That's a wonderful way to respond. Mm-hmm. It really is.
Yeah.
Because it also acknowledges it.
It does. And that's what's so important is the minimizing, the power overing. We talked about that earlier in our conversation. When people don't feel heard, they feel minimized.
Yep.
And that's why coaching is such a wonderful thing, is because it allows people to be heard and supported and companioned.
That's right. All at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And oh, go ahead.
No, and I was just going to say, and you've become a master of doing that one-on-one and with groups of people, because my experience with groups is there's always a universal theme. When you coach one person, it's a ripple effect in the rest of the people. Mm-hmm.
I completely agree.
Mm-hmm. Was there something you were going to say?
Just on the listening.
Yes.
I heard this one time. The opposite of listening is ignoring.
Oh, I've never heard that. Thank you for sharing that. That's really powerful.
I think that is. And here's what's sad to me is in so many of the coaching sessions, I can't even tell you how many times over the years, a manager specifically has said to me, I've never had anybody listen to me like you have. And I'm like, that's sad.
It is sad.
That's sad. So it's such a powerful tool and we don't use it nearly enough.
That's right. And that, Bobbi, is one of the reasons that I moved from being a speech language pathologist to being a mind-body therapist. In 1994, I remember it so well, I was with a group of women and we had to meet at 6:30 in the morning because we were all powerful leaders and that was the only time we had in our day. And so we were going around saying what we would like to have happen for ourselves. And it was a bolt of lightning that came through me that said, I'd like to be a better listener. Because in all my training as a speech pathologist, I've never had a course in listening. And so the training that I took then over the next 4 years allowed me to listen with my body as an instrument. Yeah. And that's what now I'm teaching other people to do. When you get that knot in your stomach, be aware And how do you take care of yourself and respond to the person that's right in front of you that can't wait 10 minutes for you to go off and get yourself together?
Yeah. Wait, can you hold that for a minute?
Yeah.
It
Hold
doesn't
that.
work that way.
No, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't. Well, thank you very much for sharing that experience of yours from your corporate world.
Mhm.
And so now we're going to shift into personal. And I just saw you take a breath. So
I know.
thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that. So life happens. Tell us about your father's illness and recent death as much as you want to share with the audience, please.
Okay. Yeah. So first of all, I was named after my dad.
Oh, really?
Yeah. His name was Robert. He went by Bob. And of course I'm Bobbi. And I kept my maiden name even when I got married because dad didn't have any sons. And so I'm
Oh,
like, okay. And I was always a daddy's girl, right?
okay.
I mean, I remember going fishing with him on the river when I was a young girl. I had a wonderful knack for catching snapping turtles. I have to say, my poor dad, he'd be like, not another snapping turtle. But I was a master at that. I wasn't even trying. Um,
Oh,
so, uh, so my dad was 89. He passed away on Veterans Day of 2022. So 6 months ago, whatever.
yes.
And coming up on 7 months, I guess. And he was a veteran of the Korean War.
Oh,
Yeah. And so even though he was 89, which is a rich, full life,
mhm.
it was unexpected
Oh,
because he had been to a doctor even a couple of years prior, and they're like, he was so healthy, so healthy. And they're like, you could live another 20 years. And his
wow.
sister had just passed away last year as well. And she was 99.
Oh, my.
Yeah. So it's like we have good longevity on the Kahler side.
You do.
And so in October, well, actually in March of last year, he had one episode where he was alone by himself for a few days and he didn't eat.
Hmm.
And yeah. And so, but he rebounded from that. And then he went in the hospital in October with, it was I think a mild COVID case, but he developed pneumonia.
Mm.
And
Oh,
then, so then he came down to live with me for a while because it was too much because he had been living with my sisters. And then he just one day, like you could just see it, like he never fully recovered from that.
yes.
And so one day he woke up and it was like the bottom fell out. He didn't know where he was. He was very confused, no appetite, very weak. Took him to the hospital. That was on a Sunday. That following Thursday, my little sister and I were both with him the whole time because she lives very close to me. And we had to make the decision to put him into comfort care, which, Georgena, that was the hardest decision I've ever made in my entire life. Even
Yes.
though I knew it was the best decision for him because he'd gotten to the point he had a DNR in place. And the doctor had told me that day, he's like, there's really not a path back for him.
Yes.
And, but it was at like 2:30 in the morning and we're like, we have to make this decision. And then he passed on that Friday.
Oh,
And I was there with him. I got to hold his hand. I was the last voice that he heard, but, and you'd say, well, he's 89. And a lot of people said, well, at least he had a good long life.
mhm.
Yes. And he's gone.
Yes. He's not here with me.
I heard someone say this recently, that grief is love with no place to go.
Yes.
And I think, they were quoting someone that they'd read. And I'm like, that is a perfect way of saying it because
Mhm.
it's, I always called my dad every Wednesday and Sunday night, like clockwork,
Oh,
5:30 p.m. And oh my God, he'd answer the phone and he'd always have a new, a wonderful daughter song for me. And that he'd
oh,
make up on
really?
the, yeah. And thank God I recorded at least one of them. So I still have that, but it's a void.
It
It's
is.
just, even today, I was thinking about something and I'm like, oh, I want to make sure I tell dad about that. Or I have found pictures that I've taken over the years. I'm like, oh, did I ever show dad that? Like, I wanted to make sure I showed that to him. And so it's just, it was it was just a big loss,
Huge loss.
Yeah, it's my dad.
Exactly. Mhm.
And you know what kind of is weird too? Now, my mom passed in 2008.
I see.
And so last year we lost our last remaining aunt,
Mm.
my father, And then earlier this year, we lost our last remaining uncle.
Oh my.
So that really makes you think, oh my God, now we're that generation.
Exactly. And that's scary. And it's impactful when that sinks in.
Oh my God. It's like, wait a minute, how am I living my life? Like, it really does make you confront your own mortality.
It does indeed.
Yeah.
Does indeed. And so grief is very different for so many people. Did you feel grief brain? Did you feel the shock of this? Because you said, oh, I need to be sure to tell Dad. So there's still that, oh, he's around the corner.
Yeah. I would say, I don't know if I recognized it as grief brain right away, but normally I don't miss very many details. Like my husband would say, who was a president the last time you missed a detail? Because I don't miss very many. And that might be a bad thing. But I recognize, like, I'm just not hitting on all cylinders. But one thing I did, Georgena, and this was part because of what I learned from you when you were on my podcast.
Really?
Oh yeah. Because what happened is I have a tendency to overpack my schedule. Surprise, surprise.
Can't imagine that.
I can't imagine. And so when Dad got sick and then when he passed, I record my episodes on Mondays. And every Monday between November, 18th, whatever it was, and because he died on the 11th, through, I think it was the end of March, I had 4 interviews scheduled every single Monday.
Oh, my word.
Yeah. And I said, no. And I was scheduled to be on a lot of different podcasts. And I went through and I think I gave myself like a month or a few weeks where I didn't have anything going on.
Good.
And then I went back and I reached out to the guests and I made it 1 episode per week.
Good.
Because I thought, no, this is not something I'm going to push through.
Good.
It's not the right, because you even said that, right? When you're grieving, it's a call for caring, that right? Or something like that.
That's exactly what I say. Grief is a call for care. Good remembering, Bobbi.
Yeah. But that came back to me and I'm like, no, you're not going to try to push through this. And it, in the past, that would have been really hard for me. But I thought, no. And the other thing that was helpful there is I thought, you know what, if someone doesn't understand, I don't care.
Good.
If they can't understand that, then, and I did have a couple of guests who were just like, well, then I don't want to be on. Okay, fine. Then you weren't the right guest.
Exactly. Made perfectly clear by them.
That's right. That is exactly right. If someone can't understand that, then that's okay.
Yeah, they're not your people.
They're not my people, and that's okay. So that was a huge step for me. And I've continued it. I'm like, I'm not going to go back to that overpacking the schedule.
Good.
I'm not going back there.
Nice.
Yeah. So it was, just the not quite being as sharp as what I normally am. And then, but giving myself that space. Like, no, this is what I need.
Good. So what you basically did is you changed your habitual behavior of overcommitting to listening.
That's right. To myself.
Exactly. So just as you are the supreme listener to your clients, you listen to yourself. Yep.
And I was also surprised by this, how tired I was for a while.
Oh my.
Like,
yes.
It didn't matter how much sleep I got. Like that's I was, right. Now part of that was his last week in the hospital was very difficult. Like he had like some delirium and my little sister and I would have to kind of wrestle with him. So we wouldn't yank out his catheter or his IV. Yes. And so that was like, my little sister's like, this is traumatic. I mean, it was hard. Even the nurses and doctors, it was very, and to see your dad that way, nobody wants that.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. But anyway, that's how
yes. And so there was a lot of trauma. That's why contributed to your fatigue. Yeah. And grief itself is so tiring. I felt like my bones ached, Bobbi, For
Yeah.
2 years, my bones actually ached. They hurt. I hurt.
Wow.
Mhm.
I noticed too, this is going to sound silly, but a few weeks after Dad passed, I had a dentist appointment. They always take my blood pressure for some reason. And I have remarkably good blood pressure, like
Yes.
106/60. Like
Oh, that's beautiful.
yeah, it was 120/60.
Wow.
And I'm like, wait a minute. And so I looked into it, and that's one of the things I learned, that grief can affect, for the first 6 months or 6 months to 12 months, something like that. It can affect you physically. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Because when I went to the dentist, I wasn't actively thinking about Dad or anything like that.
No.
That's amazing.
Yes. The brain emits chemicals. It goes into that
Mm.
state of hypervigilance. And as a result of that, everything is impacted. And
Yep.
so people just think, oh, it's an emotional. No, it affects
Mm.
us physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
Yeah. It's the whole experience.
It is. It's the
Mhm.
whole thing. So what or who supported you in your grief? I'm glad you remembered grief is a call for care. Thank you.
That's
very
right.
much. What were one or two other things?
So, of course, my husband was amazing. I mean, you've interacted with Rick. He's
Yes.
just one of the sweetest human beings on the face of the planet. And he's like, you know what? You grieve the way you need to. It's, you always give yourself grace. So there was that. And of course, I had friends reached out to me immediately. And then I reached out to a mutual friend of ours,
Yes.
Christine.
Mhm.
And I reached out to her. So Dad passed on a Friday. I think I reached out to her on Sunday.
Ah,
And the reason I reached out is there was some anger that I had, not at Dad, but some of the care that he had
mhm.
was not, let's say, it wasn't as good as it should have been.
Not
It
up to
was
par.
not up to par. There was a little neglect.
Yeah, substandard.
Yeah. And so, and I didn't want to carry that anger.
Good
And
for
it
you.
was at a family member.
Aha.
And so it's like, and so I reached out to Christine and I'm like, I know I don't want to feel this anger,
Yes,
but I do right now.
that's right. It's
And
here.
I know it's here. And I don't want, because I know that could, it's going to hurt me. It's not going to hurt the person I'm mad at. It's going to hurt me. And I have no idea how to deal with this.
Mhm.
And so she, we kind of talked it through. And the other thing I was feeling is I should have seen this earlier. I should have done something to prevent it.
Oh, that's a big should, isn't it?
The weight of the world, right? The weight of the world. So first of all, Christine's like, no, your dad's time was your dad's time. You showed up for him exactly as you were supposed to. And that brought like, oh my God, that was amazing. And the thing that she helped me with the anger, she's like, you don't have to approve of their actions.
Ah,
Right. And she said, and you don't have to confront them. And she said, the trick, it's not a trick, but what she taught me was when that comes up and you feel the anger, you think about that person and you say, I accept you and I bless you.
mm,
And she said, you're not saying you bless their actions or accept their actions. You're talking about at the soul level, you
yes.
accept them and you bless them. And at first I'm like, is that really going to work?
Christine, what have you been smoking?
Yeah, but I trust Christine. I've known her a long, long time.
Yes.
And it was so beautiful the way that worked. Not only did it help me with my anger, which it dissipated like almost overnight. Yeah.
Wow.
Like that fast, but it brought me a different level of empathy and compassion, not just to this one person, but I think to more people around me. So it was so incredibly helpful. And to talk to someone that you trust like that,
Yes.
that was, and of course, when I reached out to Christine, I think I texted her because she had seen my Facebook post. So she might have reached out to me to say, hey, how you doing? Whatever. And I'm like, I think I really need to talk. And she's like, when? Just tell me when.
Yes.
You just need that.
You do need that. And
Yeah.
so what I'm hearing is you had the wisdom to recognize that this anger was bigger than you and you needed support.
Yeah. And I'm not an angry person.
Nope, you're not. That's not who you are. So in
No.
many respects, when anger comes up, for those of us who are not typically wired, that's not our go-to emotion, can be scary.
Yeah.
It's like, what is going on here?
Who is this?
Exactly. And for our listeners that didn't see the previous YouTube or listen to the previous podcast, we're talking about our dear colleague, Reverend Christine Green. And I interviewed her, and her podcast was just put out on June the 6th.
Oh,
yeah. So that's why you're the next week's speaker, because
okay.
it's a logical flow for us.
Yeah.
And I really am grateful to you, because what you've done, Bobbi, is normalized reaching out for support. Because we're all resilient people. You and I know that after working with the thousands of people that we've worked with. What is the drawback, though, is for many of us, it's hard to ask for help.
Incredibly tough.
And so you recognize, this isn't me.
Yep.
I'm not an angry person. If I don't do something about this, it's going to affect me and possibly other people in my family, which might not be real good.
That's right. That's right. And it's not weakness to reach out.
No. And I think that's very, very important.
Yeah. You know, because I have a pretty high happiness set point. I'm a very optimistic, positive, happy person. But to recognize that, and I recognized it so quickly, like, it's not who I am. It's not who I want to be.
Yes.
And it's not going to serve me. And it's not going to serve those that I love. And it certainly doesn't help my dad at this point.
No, absolutely not.
No. Yeah. No.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, because I titled this Coach Bobbi Kahler's Wisdom for people grieving and the professionals who serve them. And now we've got our little subtitle. And it's so important for us to just stop and notice, what is mine to do? What is my own work to do? And I hate to tell any of you that are listening, we're never done. There's always more work to do.
There's always more work. But that's the beautiful part of it at the same time.
Tell me more.
Well, think about it. If there's always work to do, it means that we're continuing to evolve. We're continuing to dig deeper on who we truly are, who we're meant to be. And I think that's exciting, right? I don't want to think that I'm done yet. I mean, I've got more to do. And it's just part of more to learn, right? It's part of the soul's journey.
It really
that's what I mean by that.
This has been absolutely delightful. It feels like the time has just flown that we have been together. So I'm very, very curious if there's anything else you'd like to share as our time together comes to a close today.
I think what comes to mind is, this was someone who was on my podcast. His name is Jim Vave, and he is an expert in emotional intelligence. And he is also a spiritual counselor to death row inmates.
Oh my. How do you spell his last name?
Vaive.
All right.
Amazing person. And one of the things he talked about was trauma that is not healed, is transferred. Or did he put it? I think he put it this way: trauma that's not transformed is transferred.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Excellent. I've never heard that before. And it's absolutely the truth.
Yep. And that is, when we go through something traumatic, that's our job, is to pay attention to what our body's telling us and do that healing work, And on that note too, there was someone on my podcast, her name was Jenny. She was a victim of a home invasion, shot twice by a neighbor. right?
Oh, my word.
Yeah. And what she talked about, I thought this was so good. She said, people dismiss their own trauma
Yes,
because it's like, you know what I mean? And you've probably seen this, like, well, my trauma wasn't as bad as hers. So who am I to speak
exactly.
up? Your
That's right.
trauma is your trauma, and your trauma might be small. It could
Yes.
be big, but
Yes.
it's yours.
That's right.
And I think that's so important.
It is. To compare is to despair, is what
Oh,
we
I
always
love
teach.
that.
And yes, because we have no idea what a sliver in our finger does to
Mhm.
our awareness and our day.
Yeah.
We just, yeah. So
Yep.
thank you so much. So one of the things we'll do is when we post this, not only will we have your website and the points that you and I have talked about today, but I would love to have you send me the links. So we have Jenny's interview.
Okay.
And we have the other interview.
Jim's, because they were
Yes.
both. Yeah. Okay. I can
Yeah.
definitely do that. I'll make a note.
Because that's one thing, that's one of the reasons we do this, is there are so many resources in the world.
Yeah.
We cannot take them all in. So when we're guided to share this one and that one, there's a nice link there that we can trust.
That's right. Because it comes up for a reason.
It does indeed.
Yeah.
Yes, it does indeed. And we have no idea that we're projecting this on to other people, that we're transferring our trauma to others.
No.
And I love the way Jim said that. In our training, we always say, hurt people hurt people.
That's right.
And yet to be aware that we have the power to transform is why you and I are in the business we're in.
That's right. Because we do have that power.
We do. We do.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the gift of being you, for bringing your power and your heart and your wisdom today to those people who are a part of the Integrated Wellbeing community, Bobbi. This has been an absolute treat, and my energy is not drained, it's up. So I know it was a good interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.